Okay, welcome. Good morning, everyone. We're having a surprise live stream and we're going to have a surprise guest. So, I was reading recently about Florida's Don't Say Gay law. If you guys are unsure of what that is, rest assured I am unsure as well because after reading about it, I'm still confused. So, hopefully, today we're going to clarify a little bit of info about that law. It is regarding policies to limit what seems like policies to limit LGBTQ issues and identities from being discussed into the classroom, which I thought would be something meaningful to discuss as far as coming out to your students and being openly gay, queer, lesbian in school. So I'm going to play my intro. I'll introduce my guest and we can get straight into the topic. Hello, good morning.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well. So, today we're going to be talking about mainly coming out to students, being openly queer, and specifically the Florida's don't quote unquote don't say gay law. Would you like to introduce yourself at all to anybody?
Yeah, I'm Joey, and I was uh, your professor years ago when I was teaching dual enrollment English classes in Georgia. I'm not in Georgia anymore, but I work at a university in Tennessee now, and I teach English and world literature, those kind of classes, and also a course called Intro to LGBTQ Studies. I am a member of the queer community. I identify as lesbian and or queer, and I grew up in the South, and I've lived in many states around the South, and I'm witnessing a lot of scary things that continue to happen in the South. So I'm here as a member of the queer community and a concerned member of the United States, right?
Yeah. So, so you're openly queer, openly lesbian
Mhm.
within the school system, not just in your.
Right. Yes. Hmm.
Has that always been the case?
No. So when I came out, I was in college, and then when I started,
When you say came out, is this like a self discovery or is this something like let me are you realizing this at the time or is it something you've already realized and now you're just opening up about it as
yeah,
far as
that's a
coming
good
out?
question. I think everybody's discovery of their sexuality is different. I would say that I knew that I wasn't maybe like my friends when I was pretty young, but I had no idea what that meant. I just knew even in elementary school that I didn't feel like I was on the same page as most of the other girls I was friends with. And then by middle school, and I was really tomboyish, which wasn't really a huge problem when I was a kid. Most of my friends who were girls were also really tomboyish. So like but then we got a little we got older, and I remember this moment in 8th grade when there was this boy who was supposed to be really cute, and I guess he was. And all of my friends were like, "Oh my god, Andy's so cute." And I was like, "Oh my god, Andy's shoes are so cool." Like I just
Mm,
want Nikes. So so it was like that. And then by the time I was in high school, I was very aware that I was attracted to other girls, but I didn't really know what I was going to do with that. I grew up in a very conservative religious home, and I knew the rhetoric that I heard suggested it was not possible for me to be gay, like it wasn't allowed. And so I had no intention of coming out. I was just going to, if it were possible, just marry a guy and live my life. I thought, how hard can that be? It it's hard. I couldn't do it. Um, and then when I knew I couldn't do that, I thought, well, I'll just be alone. So, but but then by the time I got to college and I met my first girlfriend and, eventually did come out to my family, it was it didn't go well, at first. I got a lot of prayers, you know, a lot of calls, people reading scriptures from the Bible at me, and it took it took years. It didn't take super long for some of my family members to just get over it, I guess, accept it and or change their views. It took my mom a while, which makes sense. She had grown up her whole life hearing things and she had to undo a lot of that knowledge. She's had to do that about a lot of things, though. Um, she's come around. She's great. She's very supportive. My dad was always supportive. My dad passed away 5 years ago, but he was always supportive. So, and then I have other family members who don't talk to me. And so, that's their loss because I think I'm kinda cool, and so that's on them. So when I came out I wasn't out to students at first because I didn't really know. I went to high school in the '90s and early 2000. I graduated in 2000, so, I mean, I'm old, and, you couldn't be out in a small town in the South. It
I was going to ask in regards to being openly queer, how it is in the past versus the present.
Right, like, it just wasn't a thing then. It would have been social sabotage. It would have devastated a community, my small town. So,
When you say social sabotage, is it simply, oh, now you're going to be known as that teacher, or is this something where there might be financial consequence, like you can lose your job? Is there anything?
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh gosh, I think back then, even in the '90s, we had some teachers that we sometimes suspected were probably gay. I still don't know. I think they still aren't out, right? Like, because they're from that older generation. They would have lost Yes, they would have lost their jobs. I'm sure they would have. I don't think it would have been possible for them to continue, in a high school setting, for sure. I never thought I was gonna be a teacher, and, I mean, I wanted to be a soap opera villain. Uh,
Mm.
that was my goal. It seemed like you didn't really have to do a lot to do that job, and you got to, be cool and be on TV. So, when I, fell into teaching, I also knew I wasn't gonna teach K-12. So I was teaching in a college setting, and you get a lot more freedom to be yourself on a college campus, and there's more security there and more support, at that point. But when I first was teaching, I was a grad student, and I wasn't out to my students. I wasn't that much older than them, for one. I was, 23, 24 years old teaching 19-year-olds. So, they were kind of my peers. I wasn't out. And then what did it for me, and when I decided I was always gonna come out to my students, I taught for a little while at a private Christian college in another state, um, and, I couldn't be out while I taught there, or I would have lost my job. I had to sign paperwork that said, I wouldn't be gay and I wouldn't drink beer in public and all these other ridiculous things that you have to sign when you,
Well, okay, I understand the alcohol. There's actually like document you have to sign to say I won't be openly queer or anything.
right, yes, like, you can't and they can do that because it's a private school, so they can make their own rules, right? I knew what I was getting into, so
Wait, where did the limit stop as far as I didn't know that private schools could do something like that. My understanding is
do
that you can't.
whatever. In terms of what they can make rules, all kinds of rules. The only two that ever stuck out to me, I probably who knows what all I signed away, but was that I couldn't be openly gay. And sometimes they play around with the language, so they might not say that, but they'll say something like, "I will live my life to glorify God," and there's like these kind of ways that they're saying you have to live in a certain way, but without saying it. Um,
I'm still wondering, is there a line? Is it specifically that they can discriminate insofar as we don't hire LGBT teachers, or is it that they're required to hire them, but they can say that you're
No, they're not required. No, no, no. They had no idea I was gay when they hired me. You know,
would they be able to say something like, we don't hire black people, and it
that's a
be
great question. Um, I'm sure that they have a clause that says they don't discriminate, their standard clause. We don't discriminate against race, ethnicity, that sort of thing. But in that clause is generally not anything at a private school like that says they don't discriminate against gender identity or sexual orientation. But so no, I don't think that it would be so that they could discriminate against hiring people of color at this point. But I
um,
would say years and years and years ago, that was probably the case, yeah.
okay, so
And
you
who
think,
knows when that evolution took place, right? It's very slow. I can tell you looking around, thinking back, I don't remember seeing any professors of color on that campus. And
mm,
I think I taught 2 Black students. So it
was
was
I one?
at that school. No, at
Oh,
that
okay.
2, and that was, I mean, so, yeah, it was a weird kind of insular community, and, it stressed me out. I was really stressed out about being in the closet all the time. And so when I left there, I vowed, that I would just be out to my students. Which was so then we moved to Georgia and I was teaching at CGTC. It was fine. It was on campus, like, to be out. But then I found out I was gonna start teaching the dual enrollment classes, and I was gonna go into a local high school, and that's where I met you, and that I was gonna teach, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders a college curriculum, and I thought, "I'm gonna have to be in the closet again. Like, I probably can't be out at this high school." I did go in immediately out. For one, I'm straight passing, and so it's like really not hard for me to just be in the closet and kind of safely coast, right? But I had some students who I think were starting to pick up on a vibe, and I was, and I also had students that I recognized that were probably queer, like, and I felt obligated. I felt for a couple of things were going on. I felt like it was important for those students that I suspected might be on a journey to uncovering their sexuality. I think it was important for them to see a queer person as an authority figure in the classroom so that they knew they had an ally and representation.
Okay, so we can get to, I guess, benefits, consequences of coming out later.
Sure.
But what I wanted to know specifically is how it happens. Are you familiar with Matt Walsh or Ben Shapiro, any conservative news media outlets? So they present LGBT teachers coming out as like an indoctrination of children, as like a brainwashing or grooming, sometimes they say.
Mhm,
So this was confusing to me. I thought, well, how do you come out to a class, I guess?
mhm. Sure, it's different, So when I teach I'm going into my college class on campus, and I don't just say, "Welcome to English, whatever. I'm your gay teacher," right? I do it really like, now I'm just like, I'll say something like, "My wife works on campus too," and then they just know, right? And so I don't have to say anything anything else. But when I was teaching in the high school setting, I kinda had to do like I had to say, like, "I just feel like you all should know that I'm gay."
Now, when you came out to my class, did you come out to my class?
Mhm.
When you came out to my class, I don't recall it being like a, "Hey, students, I'm gay."
Right.
I recall my class being extremely inquisitive into your personal life. Um,
Right.
I
Well, that's
think
what happens when you're in high school, right?
high school students, yes, it's
Yeah.
extremely intrusive. I feel like at one point you were Miss Joey, and then at some point you became Mrs. Joey while you were teaching us.
Right.
No, and
Sure.
I'm pretty sure that was after I'm pretty sure gay marriage was legalized
Right.
while I was in high school.
Mhm.
So at some point we didn't connect the dots at that point, but you just became Mrs. at some point. And we were all, well, where's Mr. Joey? Where's Mr.
Right.
Joey? We don't see Mr. Joey. Where are the pictures of Mr. Joey? I'm pretty sure all we saw was like a picture in one of your lady friends on your desk. And at some point, I feel like you said something like, "Oh, that's not my lady friend. That's my wife. We got married
Right.
recently." And we were like, "Oh." And then we continued English, and I feel like that's how it happened. I don't feel like it's like a all right, kids, there's no lesson plan today. Today we're going to hold up the pride flag for six
Right.
hours. Don't go to your other class. I feel like there's like a maybe a misunderstanding of how coming out works. Like if it was like that, where even if it was a straight teacher who like stops the class to say we're going to talk about my wife and kids today, I feel
Sure.
like that would be a lot different than just like you having a picture of your wife on your desk and we take notice to that and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gay.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um
I agree. I think that there's a misconception that all of the queer teachers are like standing in front of their classroom saying, let me tell you the struggles of coming out and my whole story. When yeah, I think it's really more of kids are perceptive, especially and high school students especially are, and they want to know who's standing up there. I think it seems weird not to hide it, right? It's dishonest for one, and like I said before, I think it's important for students to know that there are queer people all around them, and this person who's been teaching you all semester that you like and stuff, oh, well, I didn't know, and now I know this thing about them, and it was already true, right? So
yes.
it's not like I revealed like I had some discovery. It was a thing about me that was already true, and then everybody just knew it.
So I guess we've already answered this question. Do you think it's appropriate to come out to students?
Yes, I think it's important for the reasons I said, like that students need to see themselves seen. Think about this. If, how important it is to see people who look like you and who believe like you and who have had some of the same struggles as you have in positions of power, right? um, so that you can see yourself reflected in those people, but also so that you have an ally in an adult. I didn't have any queer allies growing up in my high school setting, or I mean, there was no one. There were no teachers that I could have turned to. So, um,
So as far as benefits, you feel like this helps LGBT students?
yeah, it helps them feel seen. I think it helps them feel safe. Sometimes you only have people out in your school to turn to. Maybe your home life isn't great, and so the people that you have that you can depend on are those teachers, that and the people that you see outside your home. Um, and so, yeah, I think it creates a safe place for queer kids to know that, okay, do know that there is at least this one adult that I can talk to if I need to have someone to talk to.
Do you feel that there are any consequences as far as, not to you, obviously, there might be if you're in a conservative
Mm.
place, but to students, to the administrator, do you think there are any consequences to anyone?
I don't see what the consequences would be for students to know that they have a queer teacher, right? What it wouldn't be of consequence to them. Um, I guess to play devil's advocate, if there's a very conservative student, that student might feel alienated or something because they're thinking, "Oh no, I have this queer person and I don't agree with their lifestyle," which I always think is so funny to say anyway. But you know, I had to go through lots of situations where I had teachers who I knew that I didn't agree with them about things, and it didn't affect our classroom, you know?
Um, regarding coming out, I guess I'll read a couple of questions since we're at
Mhm.
the 20-minute mark, and then I'll move on to the next section. Question for later. Kids can be very mean and frustrated. Is opening about life for a teacher just opening the gate of a difficult teaching environment? And I would add, has there ever been a time where you come out to a class and there are students who are not with it, like anti you at that point or antagonistic?
So, I can when I was teaching you all, I'm sure there were students who were not, like, a fan of gay people, right? You would know who they were before I would,
Oh
probably.
yeah, I know who they are.
Right. I don't know who they are, though, and they never, acted disrespectfully to me, to my face. They never, I don't feel like they ever sought me out or tried to make me feel that's me, right? And that could certainly happen to other people. I carry a lot of privilege in the fact that I am white, I am straight passing. I'm not a stereotype in the ways that a lot of people are afraid of queer people because they fear a stereotype a lot of times, right? And I recognize that I have those, that gives me a lot more freedom I feel safe because of those things. And I recognize that privilege. I have friends, queer friends who don't have those privileges. They're not straight passing. I have lesbian friends who are masculine presenting, and it is not, uh, they haven't had as easy of a time navigating these experiences as I have. Um, so I think recognizing my privilege is important. And I don't know, like in the college setting, I had at least one student who he was being very um he was being very
Homophobic.
homophobic toward another student in the classroom. And I guess this actually happened there too, at least once, where I had a student who was being really kind of homophobic toward another student in the classroom, not toward me. And I have asked on a couple occasions in a couple of classes, I've asked students to leave my class until they could either hang or change their schedule.
Is this in modern time or is this in
So
the
this would have this once there at Putnam had happened, and then once before that. So I would say in the last 7, 8 years, I haven't experienced any problems where I've had students. So there is a good progression there, I think, in the
I was
in
going to say, in regards to a student being openly homophobic towards you or towards another student, at least in the past, is there any, in modern time, you say you can send them elsewhere until
Mhm.
they learn to behave. In the past, is there any type of recourse you can do or any type of discipline you can do?
That's a good question. In the past, I don't know what a teacher would have done. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons teachers stayed in the closet, right? Because the repercussions would have been worse for them than for the student. The student would have gotten a band of parents behind them, and probably gotten rid of that teacher. For me, um, if it's in a college setting on a college campus, I just say, "Get out of my class." And I'm not a confrontational person. I'm a very passive person. And I don't like confrontation, but I also can't sit there and let one student disparage another student for any reason. So it was my job to ask that student to leave. On one occasion, the student came back and was able to hang for the rest of the semester. On another occasion, I didn't see that student anymore. They dropped my class.
So In regards to, you're speaking a lot about college and a little bit of high school coming
Mhm.
out. Do you think there's a two-part question? Number one, do you think there's a certain way coming out should be done?
Mm.
Number two, do you think there's an appropriate age range or does it matter?
Sure. I think you have to know your audience, right, with anything. And so in terms of how it should be done, I think it's best to kind of feel your audience. And it would change, right? The way I would come out for 5, 6 year olds would be different than 18, 19 year olds. I have a kid, and my kid has friends, and those friends know that my child has 2 moms, right? And they're fine with it. Kids are fine. They don't question these things. It's the adults that make that make social issues a problem, and make them into issues. Kids are just like, "Oh, yeah, she has 2 moms." Um, so I think, if I were in a K-12 setting and I was a teacher teaching kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, I probably would just wait for them to notice. It wouldn't be a conversation. Most of the time, I don't think you're talking about your personal life with your students especially when you're teaching those lower grades. But yeah, you might have a picture with you and your partner on your desk, and they might ask, and I think that's a moment where you can say, "Yeah, that's my wife," and hopefully that's not gonna open a whole can of worms, as they say.
More on that later when we speak about the Don't Say Gay law.
Mhm.
In regards to safety for the teacher, do you now feel like it's safe for teachers to come out?
I think it's safe, on kind of a wider, view of the word safe, right? It's safe in that most of us and most institutions there are provisions in place where we're not gonna be fired, so there's job security. Um, there's safe it's safe too in that if you've been at a place long enough, people kinda just know, right? So I think a lot of students, when they enroll in my classes now, they know that I'm gay, so they know that. I make sure to drop that info in on the first day in case anybody needs to drop the class, so there's no issues there. Obviously, I teach a lot of courses in the Women's and Gender Studies department, and so those students are taking those classes specifically because they care about the issue, so I don't have to I worry about it so much there. So now is it safe for a student in a K-12 setting? I think that probably depends on where you live.
Do you think there's a difference between coming out as lesbian, gay, or bisexual versus coming out as trans?
Sure, yes, huge difference. And certainly, in my state and other states with the onslaught of anti-trans legislation, we see, it's becoming more precarious for trans folks um, to safely come out. I think, I have students now who are trans, and students in the past. I think so much of it has to do with, I have students who are trans who are able to pass. And for those students, I don't think they worry about coming out as much as they worry about being outed. Because they don't maybe come out as trans, but they're worried that something will happen and someone will figure out this thing about them that and then they will be forced to have an uncomfortable conversation or they'll be forced out. Um, and so, yeah, I think it has a lot of it's definitely harder for them. And, and it's gonna get harder. It looks like before it gets easier with the bills on the table to make it difficult for many young trans people to get gender affirming healthcare. It's gonna make it harder for them to live a life, in a way that they feel authentically themselves, and that's gonna make all these things harder for trans folks.
Regarding some questions from the comments, Wake Up Makeup Slay says, I don't like that you would even have to say, I don't have to announce I'm straight. So annoying. And to follow up, my Raisin said, isn't there a difference between coming out and being out? Coming
Mhm.
out gives the impression of making an announcement versus just living life. To follow up on my question of, is there a certain way it should be done? Do you think, well, obviously there's a difference between coming out versus just being
Mhm.
out and students happening to discover it. Do you think coming out, actually having a talk with the class is appropriate in the same way that just being out is?
Yeah, it probably depends on the class, right? So I would say that now I'm at a place where I'm just out, right? I'm just out. And students tend to just know it. And so when I drop in that line, like my wife works here too, then they just know and it's, not a big thing. Um, when I taught, there was at least one class, and I don't think it was the class you were in, but I did have a class, I think maybe before I taught um, you, where I did come out because, as you say, students are intrusive and they ask a lot of questions and they get curious. And I don't think they think anything about that. They're not trying to be, it's not a negative thing. They're curious. It's fine. So I did have maybe a 10-15 minute coming out, not my whole coming out story, just, yes, I'm gay. You've discovered this thing about me. I'm not in the closet. It's just never come up here. So now everybody knows. And if anybody has any questions, now's the time to ask. And we just, had a brief kind of talk about it. And then it just spread. So then everybody knew. So I think it was fine after that.
Well,
Yeah, but there's certainly a difference in coming out and just being out. And I think it just depends on the situation if you feel like it calls for a coming out moment.
there is, again, I mentioned earlier, pushback from conservatives saying that school isn't an appropriate place for this. I guess you addressed the children not being old enough to know this a little bit earlier. You can retouch on that if you want to. But do you think school is an appropriate place for a coming out?
Well, I think it would be great if we could get to that place, like one of your listeners has mentioned that where we just can just be out and not have to come out, right?
Mhm.
Um, there is this expectation that you, as a queer person, have to reveal this thing about yourself, and there's a constant revealing that goes on throughout your life as a queer person. Like I'm constantly having to come out. Um, like and some people don't. So that's where, as a straight passing person, that I do have to come out a lot because I don't have a lot of these indicators, these stereotypical indicators that I'm a queer person. So whenever I meet new people, um, when my kid makes new friends and I'm like, oh gosh, I hope their parents are going to be cool and I'm not going to have to it's gonna be one of these things where you can't be friends with them because their parents are jerks, and so, yeah, I think there is this kind of constant coming out you have to do throughout your life as a queer person. Was the second part of your question?
The second part was regarding children not being old enough to know or have someone come out to them.
Right, I think, like I mentioned a little bit, most kids just accept it as, and if you're raising your kids, and far be it for me to tell anybody how to raise their kids, but if you're raising your kids to know there are lots of different kinds of people in this world, um, then they're not gonna question that of course, "Oh, I'm gonna know some people that are gay," right? Or queer. There my child is, very aware of all the different kinds of ways a person might exist in this world, from uh, gender identity, sexual orientation, racial identities, religious, and I think if you're raising your kids to live in our in our world, which is filled with all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life, then even the littlest of kids aren't going to be surprised.
So regarding, we were going to look at a Matt Walsh video. We'll do that right after we discuss the a news article I read regarding Florida's "Don't Say Gay" bill, which I believe is HB 1557, if I remember correctly. And just to read a little bit about it, the so called Don't Say Gay law, HB 1557, bans instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. A provision in the law also requires school staff members to alert parents about, quote, critical decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well being, unquote, which many advocates have interpreted as a way to force educators to out their gay or trans students. When teachers, quote, believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect, unquote, they are exempt from doing so. Um, what say you about the gay, don't say gay law?
So this is part of like a myriad of provisions meant to keep different kinds of people marginalized, right? This is right off the fumes of all of the backlash against critical race theory, right? Where these people are like terrified of kids knowing the truth. Um, and so these same conservative pundits are worried that we are going to sexualize children in some way by talking about our truths. And they've lumped in the language, lumps in all of any discussion of gender identity and sexual orientation with pornography. Um, and then, of course, we've got all the bans on drag and drag shows, and drag time story hours, which are just a lot of fun, by the way. So we've there seems to be fear, right? It's all fear based, and what it comes down to is people in positions of power who are afraid that they're going to lose that power, and and so the bill, I mean, one of my friends said just on Saturday, it's like there's a group of states and one of them passes a bunch of terrible anti-LGBTQ legislation, and then all of their friend states decide they're going to see if they can do something similar or worse, and then it starts spreading. And so, yeah, in Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and not even just in the South, it's spreading. We're seeing all of these bills kind of pop up that limit the don't say gay bills that limit what you can say in a K-12 school regarding gender identity, sexual orientation. That there's a bill on the table that says teachers don't have to honor a student's preferred pronouns, um, which I think is a terrible, terrible bill. There in Tennessee, where I live, there are bills to now make it impossible for minors to get gender affirming health care. And then we have a lot of anti-drag bills going on in Tennessee right now. They've had to go back, and this is probably going to be the case for all of these states passing these bills. They're trying to pass all these bills that are in defiance of federal law. They can't do that. A state law cannot, try to trump a federal law. So they're having to go back and tinker with their language. They don't have as much power as they seem to think they do.
So regarding gender affirming care,
Mm.
and then we can go to drag show. Gender affirming care, as defined by the World Health Organization, encompasses a range of social, psychological, behavior, and medical interventions designed to support and affirm an individual's gender identity when it conflicts with the gender they were assigned at birth. So is this something that's strictly medical? Is this something that you participate in as a teacher? Do you provide gender affirming care? Is it something a parent does?
Sure. So, when a child, um, when anyone's born, right? So first, I think we should talk a little bit about the difference in sex and gender because that gets conflated a lot and it's not the same thing. So when you're born, you are assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth, typically based on, external factors like your genitals and then things like chromosomes, right? And then, so it's like that's your sex, right? Your gender identity is a totally different thing that may or may not align with your sex, but your gender identity might be, um, you might be a masculine male, you might be a feminine male. If you're a feminine male, that doesn't mean you're gay either. It just means you're feminine, right? Um, you might be a masculine female or you might be a feminine female, but those things don't have anything to do with your sexual orientation. That has to do with your gender presentation. So, for some people, it's easy. You're cisgender. Your genitals and your chromosomes and all of that stuff aligns with your sexual identity and all that stuff, and everything's good to go, right? So, like, I'm a cisgendered woman. But for others who are trans and or non-binary or gender non-conforming, that's not the case. And we have learned in recent years there are many ways a person might identify as trans or non-binary or non-conforming when it comes to gender, and that all trans people do not necessarily want to have major operations to alter their bodies, but some do. And we also have learned that the sooner hormone therapy starts for a person who identifies themselves as trans, the better it is for that person in terms of gender dysphoria and for mitigating a lot of those negative things that might happen, like suicide, right, or self-harm. So a minor can get hormone replacement therapy, which will, if it starts before puberty, it will stop that process so that a trans person who was born with a penis, right, could stop puberty and then won't have to deal with the voice change and some of the other things that happen during puberty. And, for on the other side, it could stop a period and that sort of things, right? What
Mhm.
we know is that hormone replacement therapy is essential in helping, and the sooner you can get it, the better, for helping youth kind of navigate an already really murky and terrible time for everybody, like that is puberty. We also know that if you stop hormone therapy, you can just reverse you can just go back. So let's say someone got it wrong, right? And they weren't as sure of themselves as they thought they were. They're actually not trans. They were just confused. This very rarely happens, by the way, but just for the sake of argument, let's say that they could stop hormone therapy and it would just everything would revert back. So as an educator, no, I don't participate in any sort of gender therapy or anything like that, hormone replacement therapy but I do have a lot of students who do have to and who have chosen to undergo those processes to help with that. And I deal with, and I have adult students. My students are in college, so they're not minors, but many of them did start their hormone replacement therapy journey as minors. And some of them would have loved to, but they didn't have support and couldn't. And so what these bills do is it's going to make those kids who already didn't have support have even less support.
So, regarding again gender affirming care, my
Mhm.
understanding, um, based on your explanation as well as based on what I've read, is that we can pretty much categorize it into three spots. At
Mhm.
least I am now, which is going to be the psychological aspect, as far as me affirming my child, for example,
Mhm.
me calling them by the pronouns they prefer, and
Mhm.
giving them an affirming care in that way. Then there's the hormonal type that you spoke about,
Mhm.
um, or I guess people would refer to it as puberty blockers.
Mhm.
And then there's surgical,
Mhm.
which first let me start with a disclaimer that I surgical surgery is rarely provided to people under 18, at least based on my understanding from the research. So already these are extenuating circumstances. In
Mhm.
these circumstances, do you feel like it is appropriate for a child to get surgery for gender affirming care?
Um, I think as far as surgery goes, there um there are kids who are 3 years old who are already very aware of who they are and that their body does not align with, um, the rest of them in some way, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think in terms of surgery, I don't even know any minors who have pushed wanting surgery. I mean, most of them, I think, are still trying to figure things out for themselves, and a lot of the non-conforming folks I know and trans folks I know are not super quick to jump on getting surgery. The surgeries that they undergo are very intense, and I don't think most parents would, um, sign off on them. I think the hormone replacement therapy is essential, and I totally am on board with having people have access to that when they need it. The only I've had one student who underwent a full surgery, um, and he is a grown man, so and I think the process started in his probably mid 20s. Um, and certainly when he was a minor, he was not considering having these major surgeries, right? This was not until he was an adult, um, and now and also and someone had commented there, yeah, kids are not going out having these surgeries. Um, that's not even the point. It's I think the first when you mentioned the 3 categories, the first one you mentioned, which is as a parent, and I'll go ahead and say any authority figure that cares about a child, using those proper pronouns and using preferred names, that's like the biggest affirmation we can give to kids is respecting them and for who they are and for who they tell us they are. Um, Surgery is really the last tier.
So even though, like you said, it is an extenuating circumstance, and it is, I think, an extremely small portion of people who are doing this in the first place. For those people, at least, do you think it's appropriate?
I don't know if it's right for me to say what's appropriate for other people, I really don't know any minors who are attempting to undergo large gender, reassignment surgeries. Sometimes I watch there's that show on TLC, I Am Jazz. Are you familiar with that show? And there's a transgender activist, Jazz Jennings, and she's been, an activist in the trans community since she was a child, and I actually remember watching her on a Barbara Walters interview when she was a little girl, and now she's like a, I don't know, 21, 22-year-old woman, and she didn't start having any surgeries, I think, until she was 18, and this is a kid who knew from the time she was 3, you know, and so I do but she did do the puberty blockers, and that was hugely essential for her, and I'm certainly an advocate for that.
So when it comes to surgery, it doesn't sound like you're taking a position either way. I think I'm going to come out in support because, again, I think this is extenuating circumstances.
Mhm.
When we look at something, for example, like breast reduction in teenagers or young women, which is a thing, women do get surgery on their breast even when they're underage. Obviously, this isn't the majority of women. This isn't. This is specific to people experiencing breast cancer or breast pain, for example. And even
Right.
amongst those people, it's a small percentage of people who get care, since usually there are other steps that you can take before surgery. But
Mhm.
sometimes it's necessary, right? So, my understanding is that in these circumstances, we've deemed it necessary for the mental, physical, or whatever health of the child. And in those cases, I generally like to leave things up to the parent, the child, and the doctor, which has
Right.
nothing to do with me, has nothing to do with the government, has nothing to do with the teacher or whoever. That has to do with you and your doctor and what y'all decide is healthy for you. And I'm going to assume that the doctor in those cases has decided it's healthy, or they wouldn't be doing it. So,
I totally agree, and I will say that before anything like that happens, like a surgery, um, you have the person that's undergoing the practice, um, would have to go through a lot of psychological counseling, before they would be able to undergo any kind of surgery. There's a long I know even my student who's an adult and just had reassignment surgery, they had to go through quite a bit of counseling, evaluations, to ensure that the the path they were on was indeed, the path that they, wanted to be on and were meant to be on.
Thema says, please clarify what you're in support of, Petty. I am in support of gender affirming care, specifically surgery, which is where I feel like a lot of people draw a line. Um, so I am in support of that in the way that I understand the research. If you're getting surgery as a child experiencing something like this, then it's because it's needed. It's not just like some wacko doctor decided that you're going to be LGBT against your will or something crazy like that. Um, in regards to the first part was about, I forgot my second question. We went way, way into gender affirming care. Um, I think the second part was about conservative pushback. No, we were going to look at Matt Walsh.
Mhm.
So I'm going to bring him on screen now. One second. While I do that, the panel is now open. We're at the 50-minute mark. I'm trying to be conscious of your time. If anybody would like to come up and ask Joey questions yourself, you may, as well as let me go through a couple of what the comments were saying. Another question: how hard is it to juggle being a figure of authority with parents who seem less and less able to respect boundaries from being out or even just open a discussion?
Hmm. Well, I don't have to deal with parents a lot because I'm in a college setting, and so I think it's probably different for a K-12 teacher, and probably even worse if you're in elementary school than if you're in high school, because parents tend to be a lot more involved with what's going on in their kids' school situation when they're in elementary school. By the time kids are in high school, a lot of times parents are like, whatever. I know mine were like I don't think they knew what I was doing at high school. Um, so I think it's probably more difficult for those figures, queer people who are figures of authority in a K-12 setting to juggle that respect of boundaries. The boundaries are more from I don't know if it's the parents or the kids that push boundaries more though. And I think when kids push boundaries, they're not generally trying to push an adult's buttons. Kids just want to know things. And that's why I have a very open relationship with my child. And so that there's nothing that she can't ask that we won't talk to her about. And we teach her that there are no stupid questions. You don't learn things unless you ask. And then sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And it's okay to be wrong. And as an adult, I also just freely admit when I'm wrong to my child. I think a lot of times parents don't wanna do that. And that when you're having these discussions with your kids, you might not get it right all the time, but that doesn't mean that the discussion has to be over. Parents, teachers, kids, we're all still learning. And when it comes to gender, I can say this, it's it's always in flux. It's ever changing. Everything we know about Sexuality and gender is always changing. It's a continuum that we're on. We're learning more and more every day, because it's something we've been told is fixed. We've been conditioned to believe in this binary of man and woman, right? Male and female. And it's just not true. The binary is just not real. There are so many ways to be. So the first thing we have to do is dismantle that.
Like heteroflexible, so to speak.
Sure. Like, I think it would be, I have so many students who use they pronouns, right? Um, and I think what we've learned is that this idea that we had of male and female is just, it's not practical for a lot of people. And for more and more people every day, they're uncomfortable being in those boxes.
Okay. The actually before we got to Matt Walsh, I do remember I was going to ask about drag, specifically drag in front of children. Is this something you feel is appropriate? And if you want to, you can define drag first,
Sure.
just so people don't
Drag is
misinterpret.
drag's been a part of many, many cultures for a long time, and it's performative. It's just, and I think there are a lot of things going on with drag. I think it pokes fun at some of the more ridiculous aspects of culture sometimes, and then I think the other thing it does is um, it celebrates femininity, and so it's it's not anything that's specific to America either. It's cross cultural, and it's so the thing is, there are in a lot of cities they do a drag time story hour, and that's what a lot of these bills are kind of like harping on, this idea of drag time story hour, which is where some of the communities, if you're in a community that has well-known drag queens, um, they they do, like, yeah, someone mentioned a drag brunch, um, and so it's they'll have a drag queen come to a story time at a public library, and they'll read a story, and um and it's fun. I mean, it's right, look at that. That's great. I would say that it's no different or I mean, it's just as entertaining as, so on at our public library, they do a Star Wars celebration on May the 4th. And because May the 4th be with you if you're not a Star Wars nerd like I am. And they have a guy comes dressed as Darth Vader and reads a hilarious children's book, like as Darth Vader, right? And and I would lump the drag performances into something like that. It's just a way to be engaging, kind of fun. There's certainly not. We don't need to worry about drag queens trying to influence our children in some way, or um, sexualize them or victimize them. That is absolutely not what they're trying to do. They're entertainers, and they're just trying to entertain and educate. They're just reading books.
So, in regards to drag, I am I'm from the Black community. Obviously, I feel like Tyler Perry's Medea series is really like a staple, almost as big as Spades in the Black community. So I'm my understanding or my thing about drag is I feel like if oh, we have representatives in the house. I feel like if it's appropriate, it's appropriate. If it's inappropriate dressing, then obviously that would be something only for adults. But like the picture that we had on screen, I don't feel like something like that is inappropriate. It would be like Medea coming to school and reading for children.
Right.
So um, yeah, I don't think I have an issue with it. A surprise question before we go to Matt Walsh: do you think it's gay for a man to give his homie's head?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm an expert on that. I would say that it's not for me to say whether or not something is gay, right? I'm not the gay police.
Okay, so just what I'm noticing consistently in regards to this question is that it's ambiguous. We really can't call it gay.
Right, sure. I think we're very quick as a culture to label things. And we like to put labels on things because we like things to be easy to understand. And sexuality and gender are not super easy to understand all the time.
Okay. We did have someone in the back. It looks like they wanted to ask a question, so I'll bring them on screen now. But yeah, people are saying the Black community would literally let Medea come to do the prayer at church. Yeah, I feel like it. Yeah, I have no idea why it's even a question. I think, well, when people think of drag, I think they think that people are going to be like shaking their booty in front of children, which, I mean, maybe you would find that inappropriate as opposed to like reading books.
Well,
Um,
here's what it really is. And I think it's actually maybe a little more malicious than I mean, because drag, so with the wording of these bills, it makes it possible then for them to call anything drag if it's not. So, like a trans person could then be harassed because they're not technically dressed in the way that would correspond with their assigned at birth sex, right? So then a masculine presenting lesbian could be stopped and harassed because even though she could be considered in drag because of how she's dressed. So it's really just a way to openly harass queer people.
in regards to the question on screen, people think that since Tyler Perry isn't gay, his drag is okay. Question mark. Also, when a straight man is joking by wearing drag, it's just funny. It's do you think that people are more okay with it when it's making fun of what's going on as opposed to actually being drag?
Oh, sure. I probably so. I think that's probably true. I also think, there's a misconception that all people doing drag are gay, that all those men are gay, and that's not true. Some of them aren't gay. And so, um, that's something to keep in mind too, that we just have this idea that all drag performers are definitely that are gay, and they're not all gay. But I think a lot of them, it's a way to celebrate. It's celebratory. Someone mentioned that earlier, um, and yeah, like I do think probably because straight men have been doing it for a long time, right? They have been performing in these drag situations, and it's always funny and celebrated. I remember in high school, the football players, when I was in high school, the football players would dress up as women and in their football, and I don't remember the point of it, but they would just wear heels and a dress, and there was a pep rally, and it was supposed to be so hilarious. Um and I remember thinking even then how funny everybody thought it was, but how if, this kid over here that I knew was in the closet, if he did anything even slightly effeminate, he would have been called out and ridiculed.
Okay, I agree, by the way. Pablo, you had a question. Welcome.
Am I coming through clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying you're for gender affirming surgery?
Yes.
For children?
Yes. Well, for minors.
Why?
I think in these cases it's an extenuating circumstance. For example, remember I brought up a study earlier from it was a September issue of the Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. The official medical journal of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. And although it's not common for young girls, for example, to get breast reduction in teenagers or in young women, even if they're adults, it's not common. Generally, it seems like the benefits outweigh the risk in these circumstances. So if the benefits outweigh the risk and the risk are assessed and the doctor, the child, and the parent decide that it's worth taking the risk, then Yeah, I think I'm in support of that, which generally it seems to be the case. If a child walks into a doctor's office and says, "I want gender affirming surgery," do you believe that they're going to be given it right there on the spot, or do you think there's going to be a mental evaluation? Do you think there are going to be steps of other gender affirming care before it gets there? I think it's going to be the latter, and in that case, I feel like it's appropriate.
So you think you have to be have gender dysphoria to be trans?
I'm not sure. I don't think you have to have it, no, but I'm unsure.
So only children with gender dysphoria would be able to have gender affirming surgery in your mind then?
In regarding insofar as these people in these extenuating circumstances tending to have dysphoria,
I'm confused what extenuating circumstances would mean here, if not.
I'm asking, is that what you're saying?
For there to be a psychological judgment on a person,
Hmm.
wouldn't there be a psychological diagnosis?
Yeah, I assume so. Yes.
So you would believe then you need gender dysphoria to
I
be.
think that would depend on, does the doctor need gender dysphoria to give gender affirming surgery?
Yeah, you said the research is solid here, so I'm confused as to the confusion from you now.
I think most trans folks and kids do, from my experience in these having conversations with people who are trans or non-binary, have experienced some degrees of gender dysphoria in their life, which has been the reason why they have, one of many indicators that they are trans, that they're non-conforming, and I think also just most people experience some levels of gender dysphoria at some point in their life, especially around puberty.
So I think
But wouldn't that
this is what was confusing me. When it comes to a circumstance like this, I think mainly they're going to look at something like emotional distress and depression. And I think that is going to highly correlate with gender dysphoria in these circumstances. But I don't necessarily think you need gender dysphoria to be in that circumstance. So I don't think you need it, although I do think it's going to highly correlate with people who are getting these surgeries.
so? To understand what is being said, you think that children, first, I didn't think children were getting confirmation surgery. I thought that was a right wing talking point. I didn't think
When
children
when
were.
I say children, I just mean under 18. I don't mean like 6-year-olds.
So
I
when
would have to, now I would have to do research for that I
when you
don't
said
have.
minors, what were
Mhm.
you? When I said children and you said minors, what were you? What was that about?
I'm thinking anyone under 18, but I assume this is going to be generally teenagers. I would have to actually do research to know if there is an age cutoff. I assume there is.
For minor, but it feels like you're backing out of like what age can
Am
that
I
be?
am I using are you using a literal definition, a colloquial? When I say minor, I mean under 18.
I
Although
agree,
now that
I
you bring that,
understand that was
mhm.
so when I said children, you said minors to make it under 18, which is fine. That I'm asking you, at what point would there be a cutoff for you
For
currently?
me, I wouldn't make a distinction. I would leave it up to the doctor, the child, and and the and the parent. So I think that's going to vary.
I think in most cases, hormone therapy can start around puberty, and most surgeries at the very earliest are probably around 16, 17, like pushing up against technical legal adult age. I don't think that I don't know of any surgeries that have been performed earlier than that, but I'm
Neither do I. And hormone therapy and can be reversible later on, so that makes sense, at least from my perspective. Reassignment surgery I didn't know that was happening. So when Teddy is saying that like he is for it, it seems odd because I didn't know it was happening and I don't know how young this is happening.
We could do another live stream about it
All
where I
right,
can actually research more into it, and yeah, we can fight.
all right, sounds good. Thank you for your time.
You didn't have anything for Miss Joy?
Oh, I'm listening. I like what Miss Joey is saying. I think more people should come out and there should be a lot more representation. So that seems like a good thing. No question. Just thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Period. All right, thanks, Pablo. No one else came up to ask questions. I do want to be conscious of your time. If you have a limit, let me know. Otherwise, I just have Matt Walsh. If you don't have time for that, you can always just give us an outro.
Let's do Matt Walsh. Let's. I got a little time.
Okay, let's see what Matt Walsh has to say. Matt Walsh asked, "Why are so many teachers coming out as LGBT to their students?" Let's see what he has to say.
During class. I've seen at least 3 videos documenting this in just the last few weeks. We played one several days ago where a high school teacher records himself in class as he called the students' attention to himself and proceeded to inform them that he is non-binary and his preferred pronouns are all pronouns. He is all things to all people, as the Apostle Paul once wrote, though in a very different context. We're not going to play that video again, but we do have 2 more. First, here's another non-binary teacher talking about her experiences coming out to her students, and she's talking about them in response to a question from another teacher who is also non-binary, and here's what she says.
Also, if you need me to pause at any time, let me know. If you want to pause and make comments on anything. I did want to pause and point out what I feel like is already a vitriolic framing. It feels like there is malice already from his presentation, even before we even see anything. But you know, in the spirit of good faith, he is, I guess, a YouTube personality. Maybe this is just his style of humor. I guess if you have no comments, then
he, you know, if we're from an educator standpoint, I would say it is just as important for an educator to be able to be identified by their preferred pronouns and as it is for a student, right? So if this is where that teacher's journey has taken them and they are a non-binary person, they need to let their students know which pronouns to use and what names they prefer. Just makes sense.
it does feel simple to me,
right?
With that framing. Again, I want to point out earlier you were talking about critical race theory, for example. I can't imagine someone starting a conversation like that with these Black people are trying to indoctrinate our children. Like already there's malice, and it doesn't feel like we can have an actual conversation. Like if you have actual concerns
Sure.
and you want those concerns addressed.
But
I
he
feel like,
probably has started that exact conversation, though.
yeah, actually, I think he has. But yeah, if you have I understand concerns. It's new, even though I think it's simple for me. Maybe it's not for all people, and they do need explanation and talking to. But if it feels like it's framing with malice and not actually from a place of I want to know why, what to do, and how to move forward.
Right.
So let's see what he's responding to.
Can be reasonably assured that you are safe being out on your campus, then do it. Before coming out as non-binary, I would come out to my students every October on National Coming Out Day. I would use that as an opportunity for my students to learn how to receive somebody coming out to them in case that had never happened to them before. We used it as a way to talk to each other about empathy, about connection, about trust. It ended up being a wonderful experience that I had with my students every single year. So think about what you would have needed when you were in high school or middle school or whatever grade you're teaching. For some students, just the knowledge that a queer adult exists within their world is hugely impactful. You don't really have to do anything other than be visible for these students to feel safer and more accepted and more at home when they're on campus. It does so much for students who don't have that in other places in their lives. For that reason, my classroom is one of the gayest places probably on the planet. Everything is completely covered in rainbows. I've got flags everywhere. I've got queer literature because I want every student that I have to know that being queer is something that I am proud of, something that is not a secret in my life. It's something that I care about and something that connects me to other people. I'll end by saying that for me, being visibly queer is a non-negotiable. I introduced myself this year with my pronouns immediately. It was one of the first things that students learned about me.
Somehow the most.
So before we get into Matt Walsh's response, any critique of what she said?
I'm really on board with what they're talking about in terms of visibility. Doing it on National Coming Out Day too is really cool, and they also mentioned empathy and how it sort of sparks this whole like a deeper connection with your students that I think is true when you reveal a truth about yourself that students know to be a difficult truth. It does create a vulnerability that maybe makes it a safer space for those students to feel like that they can be their authentic selves with you as well. It does create that sort of reciprocal relationship that you want with your students in terms of making a safe space and making them feel seen and valued. Yeah, I'm totally on board with what they're saying.
Okay, regarding a question in the comments, we had one question on the long-term side effects of hormone therapy, which if you guys heard me earlier, we can get into it from in another live stream. I think the main concern with long-term is going to be bone density, if I'm correct, or an increased risk of osteoporosis. Now, when it comes to whether or not you think that risk is worth it, again, I think that's going to depend up to the individual. I personally don't think having weak bones is a big deal, but I'm also young and hip and not old yet, so I don't know. Let's see. I have a very good friend who's a trans woman. She's 63 years old and has been taking hormone therapy for almost 20 years. She's suffering from horrible long-term side effects from her therapy. Again, I'm going to leave that up to the individual, their healthcare provider, and well, she's grown now, so she can make a decision about that herself. My understanding again of the long-term side effects, the main one is going to be bone density. I don't know how rough of an effect that has on the body. Regarding there's an uptick of young women and girls getting BBLs under the age of 25. Maybe this is a comment on the idea of someone young getting surgery. What say you, Miss Joey, regarding
What's BBL? That's
this is a Brazilian butt lift.
Okay. So I'm like, I'm definitely not going to get one of those. I guess this does connect with the idea of body alterations, right? It's a little different from than a trans person who is looking to modify their body, for the reasons I think would be different than somebody who wants a Brazilian butt lift. That can go into a whole other segment you might want to do about our culture's obsession with the beauty ideal and these impossible standards in which we are supposed to live up to make ourselves fulfill this impossible ideal.
Okay. Scorpio says that's exactly what my friend is suffering from regarding the bone density.
Yes.
She plays tennis, so it's not going well. Now, if it's again, I'm going to have to research. But if this is like I can no longer walk because my bones are weak, I think that's going to be a lot different than I can no longer play competitive tennis, or maybe I can no longer do recreational sports to an extreme. I think that's going to be different.
I think that person probably has to weigh the pros and cons of, I would imagine she's dealing with making a decision about what she needs to do for her mental and emotional health versus physical health. And it sounds like she's chosen to put her mental and emotional health ahead of her physical health. And that's a tough choice. And I can't imagine.
So I think the question there is going to be, as an adult, if you make that, assuming we have the research ready, which recently more research has come out about children taking hormone therapy long-term, which is where the bone density thing comes from. I think what we're going to have to assess is that a decision a child can make reasonably with their medical provider and with their parent? Can they assess that risk regarding? Well, my thing is they don't have to. If this is about long-term, this is something as a child, you're saying this is happening around late teens. So this is a decision you're going to be making from like 16 to 18, not necessarily 16 to 26. Once you're at the 18 mark, you're an adult making adult decisions, which I feel like is different. So I can't see an issue with a child having long-term negative consequences because a child's only going to be making that decision for a few years. Then it's going to be an adult making a decision about their body. And whether or not they're making a long-term decision is up to them. Question regarding pronouns. If I don't know and refer to a person as they appear, the person take offense. Is that reasonable to be offended if I don't know?
Good question.
I get called a woman in these streets all the time. I just correct people and let them know I am a sir, he, him, he/he, because I'll never be him. But I think offense is going to be based on the person who is perceiving it as offensive. If you're doing something, well, you're saying you don't know. If they think you're doing it maliciously, I think they're going to take offense. If you're just some random person walking by and they're like, actually, it's ma'am, and you're like, oh, sorry, I think that's like,
Right.
I don't think anybody actually cares. I don't think there's
Most people would be fine with an apology, right? Yeah, I'm sure I get it wrong too. In terms of pronouns, we put them in our email signature. A lot of us do now on campus. And I think affirming someone's pronouns is extremely important. When I have students on the first day, I have students who, and I ask my students, what's your preferred name and what pronouns would you like me to use? And so that I get it right. Because you can't always tell by looking at someone what pronouns they use. And I had a student who used he, she, or they. And if I were going to look at that student, I probably would have defaulted to he, right? He had kind of like a goatee and he like had very stereotypical masculine looking characteristics, but their preferred pronouns were he, she, or they. And so you don't always know. And I had a professor friend of mine who's a very masculine man who said, do I need to put my pronouns on my introductory stuff for my class? And because my students know I'm a dude. And I'm like, well, it's not for you, it's for them. So adding your pronouns to your signature is not so that it's not in any way to reaffirm your masculinity. It's to let your students know that you're a cool person and that they can tell you what their pronouns are and that you recognize that it's an issue.
Absolutely. I think the best way to describe this situation regarding misgendering someone is when I was like really small, when I was like 6. All my alarms going off right now.
I have a reminder. You can.
Yeah, like every single alarm in my house going off at the same time. But in regards to misgendering someone, I think the best way to describe it, when I was maybe 6 or 7, I think I was in elementary, I'm not sure. There was this janitor, and he would always be sweeping the floor when it's lunchtime, and I would be in the cafeteria and pass by him every day, and I'd be like, good morning, sir. And he'd be like, good morning back. And we would do this like every single day, just like being courteous. And one day I was like, good morning, sir. And he said, actually, I'm a woman. It was I think we call them stud. I'm not sure if that's an offensive term, but it was a Black lesbian woman, and she just presents really masculine. She has a short haircut, and to me, she looked like a man, like literally every single day. She wasn't particularly figuratively or how you would think of when you think of a woman. So I legitimately thought she was a man, even though she was a cisgendered woman and was born a woman. So I wouldn't sit here and say, well, I'm going to call you a man because I feel like you're a man. I would just be like, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. And then moving forward, I would just call her ma'am. So I don't understand why I can understand misgendering someone. And I think people who are misgendered can understand that too. She didn't like lash out at me like, how dare you? Isn't it obvious? Like, no, she was just like, hey, I'm a woman.
Right.
So yeah. And then the last one was, why is your sexuality anyone's business? I think this was in regards to coming out to students or being openly gay in the schoolhouse. And again, I feel like we covered it pretty well in that conversation. Students are curious. They're going to ask questions about why is the only photos on your desk you and this lady? Oh, that's my wife. I don't feel like people are legitimately purposefully coming out. But we did just watch this non-binary teacher who came out, and even in that regard, we spoke about how affirming this can be for trans students or other LGBT students, to have that type of representation in the schoolhouse. Of course, it shouldn't be, in my opinion, a lesson plan, but I don't think it is generally. So back to the video. If you had any comments, you could. If not, I wanted to see what Matt Walsh had to say.
Let's see it.
Let's see it. Okay, you're ready for the smoke.
Students learned about me.
Somehow the most irritating part of that was still the word impactful. Just an awful word. But that's beside the point. The point is that this pathologically self-absorbed narcissist enjoys the attention and self-congratulation of coming out so much that she does it every year. She has, by her own admission, turned her entire classroom into a temple to herself. The only thing that's missing is like the incense and the hooded monks chanting in an ancient language, as is this religious temple of self-worship. Every day in her classroom, it is a chance for all of her students to join her in worshiping herself. It is a celebration of her own sexual proclivities. And she doesn't feel weird about inviting kids to take part in that celebration, or forcing them to, in fact, because this is her we're talking about. And what could be more important? What subject could be more pressing than the subject of herself? That was also the approach of the teacher in the next clip, who recorded a video sharing her thoughts after having just come out to her 6th grade students. It was important that the 6th graders be told, who she likes to sleep with. They really needed to know that information about their teacher's sexual behavior, so she was sure to inform them.
Can I just say that it's not, teachers aren't telling students anything about who they like to sleep with? That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about just their identity in terms of their orientation. It's people like Matt Walsh who bring in the sexual element of the conversation. That's not even what's on the table.
Yeah, if I recall, the teacher who literally what he just responded to was someone coming out as non-binary.
Right. Nothing to
with
do with
their pronouns.
they sleep
So
with.
it's like your teacher will literally walk in the room and be like, I go by he, and then Matt Walsh will be like, why are you telling them intimate details about your sexual life?
Right.
Anyway,
Oh man, Matt Walsh.
he says he has one more for us, and then I think I will end on there. We've already discussed coming out to students, as well as is it gay to give the homies head. So I feel like we've covered a good diverse amount of topics in this conversation.
Inform them.
So I just came out to my students. I've been wanting to do this for the past 2 years. Sorry, I'm like so emotional. And I just haven't had the courage to do it out of fear of judgment, mostly from their parents. But I had these kids in 4th grade, and now I have them in 6th, and I'm sending them to middle school, and I love these kids so much, and I trust them, and they make me feel safe, and I know they love me, and it just felt right, and I did it, and it was so beautiful. They had so many questions, which I loved. They wanted to learn, and they wanted to learn about me, and they were so eager, and a few of them clapped, which was so precious.
So you notice how this was a spontaneous and emotional video revealing her true feelings, and yet she took the time to edit.
Wait, before we get into Matt Walsh, any thoughts on the teacher?
I think good for her. It's I can't imagine coming out to a bunch of 6th graders. That's very scary. I don't know how these K-12 teachers do it. I wouldn't be able to do it. The ones, especially elementary school teachers. I think it is important, and I'm going to stand by my belief that it is important to be out with your students and let them know who you are, because it's important for them to know that.
How do you feel about her, I guess, emotional presentation, her tearful recalling?
Yeah, I get, it is very emotional. I don't react the same way to, I'm not that's not my personality. But I do stress sweat. So I think I would, if I just came out to a bunch of 6th graders, I probably would have sweat through all my clothes. But yeah, I think I get, she obviously in that video is experiencing a great deal of relief, right? I imagine she's been in the closet with her students for years, and she's finally coming out. And it's like she has just turned over this new leaf, and she can be fully herself, and that's important for her. It's going to make her a more open and honest educator, I think, and she won't feel like she's always holding something back. I think it's probably going to be good for her, and it's obviously good for the students. I think the more visibility, the better, right? Why would we want to continue to stay in the shadows?
Okay, we'll let Matt Walsh say his piece, and then
I'm
we'll
sure
say
he's just going to echo what I said. So
yeah, yeah, you two have been on one accord.
So you notice how this was a spontaneous and emotional video revealing her true feelings, and yet she took the time to edit and add the inspirational soundtrack in the background. I mean, it's hard to think of a better example of main character syndrome than that. Notice also how she says that they make me feel safe. That's an adult woman, a teacher, referring to the 11-year-olds in her classroom. And she says that they wanted to learn about me. And maybe they did, or maybe they felt forced to pretend that they did. But whatever the case, do we send kids to school so that they can learn about their teachers? As far as these teachers are concerned, the answer is yes. What subject could be more important than the subject of themselves? And on the subject of themselves, what could be a more important detail than their sex lives? See, they see themselves as defined by their sex lives, and they see the world as revolving around themselves, which means that the world revolves around their sex lives. This mentality makes for dysfunctional people. And with enough of these people in the education system, whatever their sexual orientation, it makes for a dysfunctional education system. And that is why teachers who come out to their students are today, certainly, and finally, canceled.
oh no, I'm canceled.
You're canceled.
And again, this woman said nothing about her sex life. Matt Walsh brought up her sex life. So she said nothing about it at all.
Yeah.
And like one of your listeners pointed out, it's the conservatives who are sexualizing the kids, right? It's not us.
That was Yasmin who pointed that out twice. I actually agree with Matt Walsh. It's absolutely atrocious that a teacher has to have a breakdown like this coming out to her students. We should absolutely normalize the LGBTQ. That way teachers can just come out, or they might not even have to have a coming out. If it's normalized, they can literally just exist and be openly queer, gay, trans, or whatever have you. And we won't have to have videos like that because people will just not even care. Yeah, I think I agree. Matt Walsh and I are on one accord on that point, specifically that point only. Yeah, I think I'll end my thoughts on Matt Walsh there.
Can I just say for Matt Walsh, for somebody whose whole life is to make a channel where they make themselves the center of a conversation that doesn't, like he's actually doing the thing that he's like chastising them for doing. He doesn't even see it. That's all I want to say about Matt Walsh. We shouldn't talk about him any more than necessary.
It's actually upsetting to me. I'm just using him as a stand-in for any conservative figurehead because I at least understand maybe confusion because again, I'm in the Black community, and when it comes to progressiveness, I feel like Black people vote very progressively but live very conservatively and have really conservative ideas. So when it comes to talking about stuff like this with my parents, or especially my grandparents, there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of pushback privately. I don't think they are openly like out there disparaging people. And there's like a lack of understanding. And sometimes I think people legitimately lack understanding, maybe are ignorant, want to know more about what's going on and need something clarified. Because if you're watching media like this, you might, and you don't go and do follow-up research, which I don't think most people do, they're just going to watch their favorite YouTuber, then your coming away from this might be, wait, why are people in drag sexualizing our children? Why are trans people coming out to our children and forcing them to be trans too? But when you go into the research and if you approach it from a place of understanding, that is not the case. If someone's coming with legitimate understanding, I feel like there is space to work with that. I don't think it should be a requirement. I'm not going to teach people like Black issues, for example. I'm really tired. I don't have the energy. But if people are confused about that, sure, maybe there's a space somewhere where they can talk about stuff and gain understanding. But again, that's not, obviously that's not what they're coming for. They're not coming to research it. They're not coming to look into it at all. They're not coming from a place of nuance. It literally feels like inciting fear. The
Mhm.
whole video just feels like inciting fear. See what they're doing to your kids. Like I'm it feels beyond me. He's grown, and I'm not. So I don't understand why he can't grasp it.
Well, because he's a very scared white man, right? And I think these issues I mean, this is a whole other conversation but it's all, I think so many of the issues we're talking about have just go back to white supremacy and the fear that these like conservative, usually wealthy, cisgendered, white, straight Christian men have, in terms of losing their place, right? Which they feel is at the top. And anyone who's not like them is a threat.
Absolutely. You brought out all the qualifiers: white, male,
There
you
they
did
all
not,
are.
you
Yeah.
held no bars today. With that being said, what do you think is the future of, I guess, LGBT teachers moving forward?
Well, the immediate future is kind of insecure, right? I'm a little worried about some of these laws and some of this legislation. And I think we're kind of, depending on your state, where you live, and your role in the education system, you're kind of playing it by ear right now. I feel, semi-secure on a college campus, but also a little insecure in that there's a current bill on the table to eliminate gender, sexuality, and women's studies programs, and that's the program in which I teach. And so they don't even want us talking about these issues on a college campus anymore. And if we can't talk about this stuff on the college level, I really don't know what these folks want out of education. They don't want kids to really be educated. And I wish they would just come out and say that they just don't really want them to know anything that might somehow disrupt the patriarchy.
What can I do to, I guess, assist to whatever degree I can, aside from, I guess, talking about these issues online and hopefully making people aware?
I think this is a huge thing that you're doing. I mean, I think having these dialogues is extremely important, and keeping the conversation going and admitting your own missteps and self-educating. You mentioned, you get tired of having to educate white folks about Black issues. Sure. I mean, it's up to white folks to educate themselves, isn't it? I mean, and so like, I think, there's got to be like a point where that happens. I think you recognize, and it's obvious that you recognize, the conversations need to happen and the dialogue needs to continue. And then it's an unending conversation. It's going to keep going on, and things are going to change. And so let's keep the conversation going, be an ally. And one of the hardest things to do for everyone, I think, is when you mentioned it's tricky to have those conversations with your parents and your grandparents. Grandparents are especially tricky. But we still have to call them out when we can. And it's hard. And so I think calling people out when you can is important.
Absolutely. I will end on this question, because I actually didn't realize the severity of this, and I may change my mind now. At the very end of the live, is this what you're giving to our children? Is this what you are giving to our children in the school system?
Right. Man, where can I get some gender fluid?
I am sickened in this.
Lavender. I want it. I want it.
With that being said, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time here.
Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing.
I really appreciate your perspective, and I really appreciate your willingness to be open and to discuss ideas like that. Do you have anything to say to me or anything to say to the audience?
No, thanks everybody who listened, and keep fighting the good fight. There's the argument that we could all leave all of the South primarily, right? But if we leave, they win. So we can't leave. We have to stay and fight.
Well, in the words of excuse me, in the words of Carolina Rep Maxine Waters, you if you wish to leave, you may.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If you wish to leave, you may.
Right. Well,
Or you can stay too, because now
right.
my audience, anybody in the audience who needs to come up with some smoke, just know that I'm here for the smoke today. Y'all have 20 minutes to come up and get the smoke about anything that I said during this live. Yes, I support surgery and trans people. And I also support conversation. Like even earlier, I feel like Pablo, when Pablo came on and spoke about wait, you support this in children. I didn't know this was happening in children. What say you to, does there need to be dysphoria and stuff like that? I don't feel like I'm the type of person to be like, this conversation is transphobic and I'm shutting it down. Like I feel like I'm open and
Yeah.
able to have a conversation like that. If that's a question you have, I feel like those concerns are necessary to answer. Your doctor would answer them if you went to your doctor and asked it about your child. So why would I just shut it down if it's a reasonable concern? So
Well,
yeah,
I
I feel like
people don't like to have difficult conversations, right? And that's part of a lot of times people shy away from those conversations. So, but you have to be able to be comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes, especially when you're talking about these kind of issues, hot button issues.
paging Pablo. Yes, we're paging Pablo. My audience doesn't want you to see my outro because it's interesting. So you say you're not, since you stayed, you say that you're, oh, do you actually have a time constraint?
I need to go in like maybe 5 minutes or so. Yeah.
Okay, just enough time. In regards to giving the homies head, for example, if that's a conversation you're comfortable having, my audience and I have vehemently argued about this because they say that it's something that's gay, and I don't understand, I guess, how. You say you do some work in gender studies. Is there something I'm missing in regards to this conversation?
Sure. I mean, I guess I would ask it from you then, why don't you think you don't see it as a gay act?
Well, let me preclude by saying I don't do it, since
Well,
apparently that's something you need to say
right.
where people get the wrong idea.
Uh-huh.
But gay to me is a mindset. Obviously not a mind. It's more complicated than that. But gay to me is a mindset and not necessarily an action. So
Yeah.
what I think makes a person gay is being romantically or sexually attracted to men. I don't necessarily think you need to act for that to be true. And I don't necessarily think that doing an action makes that true.
Sure.
So
I would agree with that too. And there's a double standard in terms of what's allowed, right? So it's not uncommon for young girls to experiment with each other when they're younger, right? And play house. And they might even kiss. I don't know. And even
oh
in
yeah.
college, I know girls who are presumably straight will get drunk and make out with each other, and they're not lesbians, right?
Mm.
But if you flip it around, and if a bunch of guys did it, right, then we would be very quick to label them as gay. And that just goes back to the, classic double standard on what is allowed and our culture's kind of obsession with hypermasculinity and what it means to be like the ultimate man. And there's no wiggle room there.
Let me pause and say to Afro Butterfly, she said exchanging bodily fluids mutually requires arousal. In my mind, just because someone is aroused does not mean they like what's happening to them. Or they are attracted to something that's happening to them, or anything like that. So I would separate that too. Even as I recall, there were boys in school getting aroused just from sitting in class, and who couldn't go up to the. It was me who couldn't go up to board to answer the question out of embarrassment. So yeah, no, I don't think that's, in my mind, that's not true. But yeah,
Mhm.
what you said, that's always been really weird to me. I'm not sure how statistically true it is, but I feel like I've always seen experimenting in girls in a way that I don't see in boys. Like the
Mhm.
idea of a bunch of guys getting together, going to a sleepover and doing what we consider fruity stuff is incredibly weird to me. Even though this feels like you said, maybe like a culture around girls exploring and experimenting in that age. I wonder why that double standard exists. What can we do to break it?
Right. It's still part of this idea of keeping, I mean, I teach a lot of courses on I teach a lot of topics of related to feminism in my course. And we talk a lot about the patriarchy, which is just, male domination over everything. And at the heart of that is this idea of being hypermasculine and in control. And I think that's probably what we can blame a lot of these issues on, and the double standard, and why we allow, even, in terms of, it's generally more accepted for girls to be tomboys than it is for young boys to be considered effeminate, right?
Mhm.
But we kind of accept that the girl will eventually grow out of being a tomboy, right?
Yeah.
But there's a worry that a boy would not grow out of some effeminate nature. And that even if there's even a worry of growing out of it is another problem, because maybe that's just who they are.
I'm going to try not to open up
Mhm.
a conversation about this, which I feel like could be long. With that being said, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Miss Joy, for coming. I'm
Thank you.
going to play my outro and we can all get out of here.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Mhm.